Okay, I'm going to start. So, this is my last meditation talk for a little bit, and we'll see. Maybe I'll come by and do a random one at some point in the next few months. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the current state of my life, and a lot of you guys know that I'm going to be taking a brief break because I've got a baby coming. She should be here this weekend. And I thought about all the things about this that I want to talk about, and most of it I don't know because it hasn't happened yet. So I'll be talking about it when I get back. But the lead up has been its own kind of fun adventure, and so I'm going to talk about the philosophy of stress. And honestly, I don't want to jinx anything, so I'm going to knock on wood, but this has been a fairly, for me, it's been a very easy pregnancy. For my wife, it's been, as far as pregnancies go, she's had a pretty good time of it. She's been pretty uncomfortable lately, but we have not had a lot of alarming, stressful things involved, and that's wonderful. And it still got me thinking about the impending stress because I feel like the actual childbirth will probably involve some of that. And I plan on being in there in the room, holding her hand, and Grace's dad gave me a very important piece of advice. He said, don't give her your whole hand or even 2 fingers because she'll break that and crush your hand. You just give her the thumb to hold on to because she can squeeze that pretty hard and not break your thumb. I'm thinking thumb chin, maybe she'll accidentally break my thumb anyways, but maybe I'll just give her like my forearm to hold on to. But I started thinking about the different ways that people deal with stress and the different philosophies around it. And a lot of you know that my philosophy of stress is basically just try not to do it. And this can be helpful, especially if you're the kind of person who naturally kind of tends to stress more than you should, which is basically everybody. But then there are those of us like me that after years of trying, or maybe we just have something messed up with our brains, we kind of almost go too far and don't stress enough. And with something as important and possibly dangerous as childbirth, there are certainly things that we should take into consideration, right? So my natural inclination to completely ignore things that can go wrong doesn't really work in a situation where there are lots of medical issues that could happen. And I have to be self-aware enough to recognize that. And on the other side of the spectrum of the philosophy of stress is everybody who just really thrives on stress. And I went to college with many of these people who thought I've got to have a deadline right now. One of my roommates would wait. He was in the film program and he'd be writing his scripts and he'd have a 90-page script due and he would wait until the weekend before it was due to start doing it. And let me tell you, this was a stressful time, not only for him but for the other people in the house as well. So I get that works for some people, and some people, basically, this is what all of us do on some level or another with life, is we say, well, what we've been doing has been working so far. My attitude with stress and the way that I use it has worked to get me this far, so why don't I keep doing it? Because there's always somewhere better to be, and that's why we practice martial arts, and we don't just be okay with somebody throwing a punch at us and we just do this. There's a way to improve. So there is a middle ground, right? There's the yin, the yang, kind of the opposites and the extremes, and then there's the middle road. And the middle road is really what we strive to walk. So we'll kind of talk about the differences between these and some ideas about how to get to the middle road. So for me, Personally, I used to stress a lot when I was younger, especially. I would be just like a wreck in relationships. I would always think that she was going to dump me, and like it was all like bad. And I thought, like, I'm not really actually helping anything by stressing. And when I started meditating and listening to Sifu Brown's talks, I realized that it's really my choice. If I want to stress about these things or not, I can choose. And with meditation comes this awareness of your inner environment, your ability to decide, I'm going to keep ruminating on this thing or I'm going to let it go. And I just feel like for most situations, it just wasn't really helpful to stress, so I would just completely let it go. And I'll tell you, that has served me pretty well up to a point. Now, it reminds me of when I was giving some advice. I can't remember if this was to Sam or somebody else, but you should listen if I didn't give it to you. When you're teaching a class, and it's a physical thing where lots of things can go wrong, you got to ask yourself that question. How can this go wrong? Zelda was teaching a kid's class, and she was about to have them do handstands, and she had them spread out in a way that she thought, like, this is going to work great, because she thought they'll fall forward and they won't run into anybody, or they'll fall backwards and they won't run into anybody. But she didn't consider that they could fall sideways and run into each other. Nobody would have gotten seriously hurt, but it's enough that I stepped out and I was like, this isn't going to work. Got to ask yourself, how can this get messed up? How can this go wrong? And it's important to sometimes ask, what is the worst way that this could go wrong? What's the worst thing that can happen? Now, I'm not trying to spend a lot of time thinking about how, like, the worst thing that could go wrong with childbirth, but there are always things that we should pay attention to that are worth kind of our attention, right? I'll give you another example from my life where this was maybe just in the very beginning of me practicing martial arts. I was on an airplane that was going down, basically. This is a true story. We were on a flight, and I want to say it was from Michigan to New Jersey. I was going back to visit a friend there, and we heard a loud slam, and it sounded like one of the food carts had fallen over. And then the flight attendants start running down the halls in both directions. And I asked them, like, what's going on? And they said, we hit a bird. And I thought, oh, I mean, we're in an airplane. It's a bird. I was thinking like a sparrow. I don't know. Probably they don't fly that high. But then the pilot comes on the loudspeaker and he's like, we're going in for an emergency landing. Everybody buckle up. And like, so then all of a sudden the entire airplane is really quite distraught, as you can imagine. And I'm sitting next to, I'm like 18 years old, sitting in between these two elderly ladies, and they are really starting to lose it. And I honestly never really considered, even in this situation, that we were actually going to crash and die. I just thought, like, this is going to be okay. That's just the way that things go for me. And I'm like holding hands with these two ladies and saying, like, it's going to be all right. And I'm sure that it was a very helpful presence to them. Now, if I had been flying the plane, that would have been the wrong state of mind to be in. You got to have some kind of like okay, we got to do this. What happened, it turned out, was a goose flew into the windshield and had cracked the windshield. And so we had to land a different airport immediately. And we heard about this on the news later, and I was like, yeah, that was my plane. And I was just like this the whole time. So, of course, it's, situationally dependent and also like role dependent on how much stress really is helpful or not, right? The doctor better really be paying attention and all over it. And I'm going to just be there and try to be as relaxed as possible. It has been shown with numerous scientific studies that I have not gone through all the time to read each, and give you any real tangible scientific knowledge about this. But if you just Google it, you'll see. Most studies show that, in general, stress is not good for us. It's not good for our mental health. It's not good for our physical health. It will make you die earlier. There are real problems with it. And studies have shown, at least more recently, that moderate amounts of stress for short periods of time are actually somewhat beneficial for us. That's very different from the kinds of stress that most people undergo, which is tons of stress for a long period of time. That's not healthy, absolutely. But they showed that moderate stress for a short amount of time actually improved working memory and concentration, I believe. And they did this in a couple of ways. The one that I heard about was really interesting because they had these students undergo a kind of stressful exam. I think it was psychology students at a university, and they actually preceded this by saying they gave a presentation to one group and then to the control group a presentation about something else totally different. But this group, they gave a presentation about how stress is beneficial. And they were talking about these findings and like actually if you undergo a little bit of stress, it can be helpful for you. And so they noticed that these students that knew that a little bit of stress was okay and beneficial, they actually had a significantly better result than the other students that weren't kind of primed to think like this stress is good for me. And on some level, this is just kind of like an optimistic take on stress. And this is always what I'm trying to give, is that optimistic take. If we are going through stress and we have this attitude that sounds like this is going to be helpful for me, this is going to be an opportunity for me to grow, then our experience is significantly different from thinking that stress is always bad and I should just avoid stress at all costs, and if I'm feeling stressed, that's bad for me. So that just piles on the stress. You're stressing about being stressed, and then that is just a never-ending cycle of downward to death. So try to flip that script a little bit when you are undergoing stress. And we talk about this all the time in class, right? You're doing a really hard class or a test, and Catherine was taking her 3-hour-long jiu-jitsu test for blue belt on Saturday. She passed. Great job, ma'am. Okay. And if she's undergoing this test and thinking the whole time, this is terrible, I hate this, and maybe you were having those thoughts a little bit, or if she's thinking, this is bad for me, I'm going to get hurt, that's a very bad experience, a significantly worse experience than what I assumed she was having, which was at least on some level at times, this is great. I am learning from this. This is good for me. I'm dead tired. I feel like I could just die at any moment, and I know that's good for me because it's making me stronger. And I know she must have had that to some degree, or she probably wouldn't have passed the test. And this is the opportunity that's there anytime we have a hard class or a hard test, or we're just dealing with something that's difficult in life. We want to remind ourselves that that friction, that stress is there to help us grow and help us become stronger. It's the same thing with lifting weights. If there's no stress and it's just like super easy, you're lifting 1 pound weights, so you do that all day long, you're not really going to feel it. So the stress, the strain, the growth comes from that. So that mindset, it's not enough just to have the stress and expect it. Okay, how am I going to say this? If you don't know that stress can be good for you, it probably isn't. But if you have this mindset that a little bit and you're able to manage it and not just get stuck in it, then it can actually be helpful. So the next time you're feeling some stress, remind yourself of that. I think that those of you who have met Grace might have picked this up about her, but she tends in the other direction towards like being really stressed. She is already very good at asking this question, what's the worst thing that can happen? And this is something that we go back and forth on a lot. And I really do believe that we have arrived at some kind of a good middle road between us, because if it weren't for her, I would be totally unaware of all the awful things that could happen to us. And if it wasn't for me, we would just be stressed and hate life and, have heart attacks. So we're arriving at some kind of balance, and I think this is really useful. The baby, this is obviously, she's a mitzvah, she's a blessing, like it's going to be the most incredible thing that's happened to us. And, my friend Michael, who is very wise and very good at stress management and relaxation, has been meditating for even longer than I have, told me, he had his little girl 2 years ago, about a year after she was born, said, unironically, dead seriously, this has been the worst year of my life. And I don't want to dissuade you. I mean, it's still amazing and you should definitely do it. And this has been so hard because he has not slept like at all in a year. And that's very difficult. So I'm sure there are going to be things about this experience that are really stressful and really rough, even after she's born. But we're going to find the middle road. I'll sleep on the couch if I have to, and then I'll take a turn and Grace will sleep on the couch. I want to get back to this idea of like being an optimist versus being a pessimist with regards to stress, but also just in general. So if you have kind of that optimistic spin on stress, this is fed by kind of understanding. There's a scientific base to this. There's a knowledge that helps you with that. But generally speaking, they say that pessimists are smarter, and I take exception to that because I'm very optimistic and I don't think that I'm that dumb, but I will, any day of the week, take that ignorance is bliss standpoint. I would so much rather be dumb and happy than smart and unhappy. And I will tell you that I'm sure that there's a natural kind of inclination that we have, and one of the ideas here is that if you're pessimistic, it could be that you are just smart enough to actually recognize all of the risks around you and all the ways that things can go wrong, and that's what causes you to be a pessimist. It could flow from that awareness and just basically being smart and understanding all the ways that things go wrong. It could also be that you are kind of pessimistic, and so that causes you to then look for all of the things that could go wrong. And what's the difference? It's not that big of a difference. Either way, you're thinking about all the things that can go wrong all the time, and that's going to be caused by or causing, and kind of in that cycle, a general feeling of things kind of suck, and I could die at any moment. And there is a time and a place for that, right? But I also think that you can go from a place of understanding and knowledge and really be aware of yourself and be aware of your surroundings and be aware of the nature of existence and the universe to some level, and choose to be optimistic and choose to recognize that sure, there are stresses inherent in life. Sure, there are things that we should be aware of, and there are risks, there are threats, and still choose to be happy. And whether I believe that our real goal should be to find that middle road and have the right amount of stress. And then in a stressful situation or a situation that could be stressful, to be able to choose, you know what, I've got it under control to the extent that I can, so I'm going to choose to let the stress go and just be present and be happy and optimistic about the way that this could turn out. Now, I'm going to get so thoroughly tested by the next few months, I'm positive. There will be days where I wake up and say, what was that talk that I gave? The last meditation talk about being optimistic amidst really stressful situations. I won't have slept for a month, and I'll be like a zombie, and Grace and I will be at each other's throats, and I'll have to remind myself to take my own advice and try to find the positive in the situation, and remind myself that at some point she's going to have to sleep, and then I'll look back on this time and think, I'm so glad that I went through that. It was such a great growing experience for me. It really, solidified our relationship and whatever other kind of nonsense I'll come up with in that moment. And sometimes that's all we can do. And that's great. Like when we recognize that we're in a situation where there's nothing else to do other than just be in it and just choose to be as happy as we can be, then that is just the only choice that makes sense. So when we practice meditating, which we'll do in a few minutes, this is like the preliminary step to being able to choose, to be stressed or not at all or somewhere in the middle. If we are unaware of the thoughts that we're having, and this happens quite often where people are convinced that they're not actually stressed, but it's all kind of hiding back here, and you have kind of this tape always running in the background of all the things that could go wrong. And this is when it shows up, like acid reflux and other things that our body kind of says, like, you're not processing this, so we're going to really get your attention by throwing some terrible symptoms at you that you don't know where they come from. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to say that if you have acid reflux, it's definitely because you're totally unaware of the stress that you're having, but there's a good chance. So we start with meditation, and meditation is not ignoring stress. Meditation is not pretending that everything's okay. Meditation is recognizing fully the stresses, the things that need our attention, and then choosing to set them aside and just be in this moment with this breath. Because if it really is something that needs your attention, it will be there when meditation is done. But it starts with the awareness. It starts with the recognition of what's going on in our minds, and then right after that is the ability to choose to be able to let go, to be able to be in the present, or to be able to choose, this is something that I absolutely need to deal with right now. And there are those things sometimes. That said, none of those things will happen to you during this meditation. So when we sit, you're going to sit still, you're going to sit quietly, and whatever enters your mind, whatever this, half an hour talk on stress has shaken loose for you, just set it to the side, recognize that you will be able to deal with it, and because you have gotten yourself to a clear-headed space, because you've let go of all the superfluous thoughts and the extraneous distractions, you'll be able to deal with it much more powerfully after your meditation is done. So sit comfortably. I promise you, when we're in that hospital room, I'm going to be trying to meditate to some degree or another. So I'll let you know when I get back if I had that experience of meditating in the marketplace when everything is very stressful and loud and scary, and was I able to do it or not. Hold. Close eyes. Spine straight, eyes upturned, relax, watch the breath. Let go of all thoughts, worries, and cares. Be here now. When your mind wanders, bring it gently back to the breath, and as many times as it takes.